And now, from the Break a Hacker's Heart newsroom and the team that brought you Break a Hacker's Heart, comes a special Living Off the Land edition with all the latest cyber news that's legal to say out loud.
Good evening, I'm your host, and you're not, Ben Visharan. And joining me tonight is my co-host, Aaron Bugle.
Good evening, everybody. Glad to be here to discuss BYO bugs in ransomware. It's a growing problem and we need to get to the bottom of it.
Graphics! Tonight, our special report looks at the evolution of ransomware. Aaron, would you like to do the honors and remind our viewers how the ransomware phenomenon got started?
Absolutely, Ben. Even though the first ransomware occurred way back in 1989, it was mainly an academic issue up until 2011, the kind of thought experiment conducted as a curiosity by IT labs. What accelerated the trend, the scale, and the damage of ransomware was the development of the dark web, which helped to make cybercriminals anonymous. And at the same time, the use of cryptocurrencies where payments became almost untraceable. Bitcoin really paved the way to anonymously extort money from victims of cybercrime without taking huge risks about being identified. Crooks behind CryptoLocker ransomware were able to make millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars by infecting hundreds of thousands of users and businesses, then demanding $300 to unlock each user's file.
And after the original wave of broad attacks, the big money in enterprise ransomware saw a change in the tactics, techniques, and procedures of cybercriminals. Not content with the smaller fees retailers would be willing to pay, they upscaled their attacks and their demands. The strategy was to conduct fewer but much bigger attacks against whole networks or a collection of networks. Some of the notable sophisticated ransomware attacks include SamSam, Ryuk, and GandCrab. The blackmailers demanded amounts ranging from $50,000 to $5 million.
And now, our UK weatherman Paul Duck Duckland has been looking into the latest version of this malware, the aptly named Robin Hood ransomware. Over to you, Duck.
Weather-wise, Aaron, a lot of people think that Robin Hood was a sunny sort of fellow. You know, he's supposed to have robbed from the rich and given to the poor. Of course, that's all a pack of lies. He actually stole from anybody and everybody, and he gave the money to himself, and that is exactly the principle followed by these modern-day Robin Hood ransomware crooks. And one particularly tricky trick that they use is that they purposefully bring their own bugs. Okay, so they have to get into your network first, and they have to promote themselves to have sysadmin superpowers, but once they've got that far, Aaron, they deliberately install an old, outdated, buggy Windows kernel driver, then they activate that driver, and they exploit the security holes in it themselves to dive right down into the kernel, where they can kill off security software, where they can make changes to operating system security permissions right from the inside. They can kill off any processes that they think might get in the way. They can identify files that are important files associated with things like live databases or live backups. Files that are normally locked so they can't touch them, they unlock them so they can access them after all, and then when they scramble your files, they scramble them harder than ever. So Aaron, an umbrella alone is not enough to protect from this kind of weather disaster. What you need is the 5 P's of cybersecurity weather protection, and here they are. P1 is protect your portals. The crooks have to get in somehow, and frequently we see them logging in using the same access portals that your own users might. And sometimes they're even access portals that aren't supposed to be there. So watch out for things like old VPNs that were supposed to have been retired but weren't. Look out for RDP portals that are supposed to be accessible inside your network but are not supposed to be accessible from the internet, yet there they are. Watch out for things like SSH servers that you set up for temporary use 5 years ago and then forgot about. So P1, protect those portals. And that leads of course to P2, which is pick proper passwords. we have seen many ransomware attacks, many cybersecurity attacks, where the crooks have got in using a remote access portal that was supposed to be there, and where 99% of the users had done exactly the right thing, and yet there was a guest account that had a password hint that contained the password itself. And it was there so new staff or contractors who just come on board so they could get busy working right away before their regular account was set up. So P2 folks, don't do that. Pick proper passwords. P3, of course, is perform your backups. And an excellent way of thinking of backups, there's a rule of thumb, that is the 3-finger rule. Loosely speaking, you want 3 copies of all your data. There's the master, the live copy that you're working on, and of course you want 2 backup copies at least. And ideally those 2 backups will use different technologies. That way if one of them lets you down, you've got a fighting chance that the other won't. And the most important thing of all is at least one of those backups should be offline and ideally off-site. Remember that if you've got a ransomware attack and you've got 3 copies of your data, when the scrambling happens, the live data, the data that you're using now, that's gone, leaves you only 2. Any live and online backups, the crooks typically spend days looking around your network to find where your backup servers are, to find where your cloud backup updates happen, and they kill those off. But if you have one backup left that's in a cupboard under the stairs after the ransomware's hit, then you do at least have a fighting chance of recovering your data without paying the money. So that's P3, perform those backups. P4, very simply, peruse your logs. Remember that most ransomware attacks happen in a series of stages. Like in the Robin Hood case that we've just talked about, they will have to break into your network first. Then they will have to acquire superpowers. Then they introduce that dodgy kernel driver. Then they use that to make a whole load of configuration changes. There are a whole sequence of steps that typically they will carry out first, and most of those will show up somewhere in your logs if you bother to look. And the only thing worse than being hacked is being hacked, and then when you go back and look later, you realize that the telltale signs were there all along. So that's P4, peruse those logs. And last but by no means least, P5 is patch early, patch often. In a lot of cases, the way the crooks get in the first place is by exploiting a hole in server software or services that you use, a hole that has already been patched. And why would you ever be behind the crooks when you could be ahead? So P5 folks, patch early, patch often. And Aaron, there you have it, the 5 Ps of cybersecurity weather protection. Back to the studio.
Well, thanks for that in-depth report, Duck. It's amazing how sophisticated our adversaries have become. We need to keep on our toes to keep our networks secure.
Absolutely, Ben. I couldn't agree more. As of May this year, the global average cost to remediate a ransomware attack, considering downtime, people time, device cost, network cost, lost opportunities, and the ransomware paid, was over $750,000.
That's some serious cost to business, at a time when they are facing big challenges with COVID too. For more on this topic, we've got a special report from our foreign correspondent in Vancouver, Canada, Chet Wisniewski. Chet?
Thanks, Ben. And I appreciate the jar of Manuka honey you sent to replace the earlier gift of Vegemite, which was mistaken for axle grease by one of the staff and used on their car. On more serious issues, ransomware threat actors continue to innovate both their technology and their criminal MO at an accelerating pace. More ransomware groups now engage in data theft so that they may threaten targets with extortion over the release of sensitive private data. As ransom groups put more effort into active attacks against larger organizations, the ransoms they're demanding have risen faster than an Aussie golfer's handicap. Further, distinct threat actor groups appear to be collaborating more closely with their peers in the criminal underground, behaving more like cybercrime cartels than independent groups. Server platforms running Windows and Linux have both been heavily targeted for attack, and leveraged to attack organizations from within. Common services like RDP and VPN concentrators remain a focus for attack on the network perimeter, and threat actors also use RDP to move laterally within breached networks. Even low-end commodity malware can lead to major breaches, as more malware families branch out into becoming malware content distribution networks for other types of malware. A lack of attention to one or more aspects of basic security hygiene, like an Aussie IT worker after the office Christmas party, has been found to be at the root cause of many of the most damaging attacks we've investigated. Another new problem is working from home due to COVID-19. It presents new challenges, expanding an organization's security perimeter to thousands of home networks protected by widely varying levels of security. COVID-19 turned all of us into our own IT departments, managing patches, security updates, and connectivity issues, not always successfully. Software classified in an earlier era as potentially unwanted because it delivered a ton of ads but was otherwise not malicious, has been engaging in tactics that are virtually indistinguishable from overt malware. Several ransomware families have also picked up on a side hustle designed to increase pressure on their victims to pay the ransom, even if every backup with essential data was safe. Not only would they hold the machines hostage, but they would steal the data on those machines and threaten to release it to the world if the target fails to pay the bounty. Over the past half year, Sophos analysts observed that ransomware adversaries have settled on a common tool set to exfiltrate data from victims' networks. This tool set of well-known legitimate utilities won't be detected by traditional endpoint security products. The list of ransomware families engaging in this activity includes Doppelpaymer, Revil, Clop, DarkSide, NetWalker, Ragnarlocker, Conti, among many others. The criminals use this toolset to copy sensitive internal information, compress it into an archive, and transfer it out of the network and out of reach of the victim. Sophos set up honeypots in 10 data centers around the world to try to better understand just how targeted remote access protocols were. Over a 30-day period, the honeypots received a median average of 467,000 RDP login attempts, or 600 per hour at each location. The research revealed that each honeypot received a steadily increasing frequency and ferocity of login attempts till we finally pulled the plug. Although, to be fair, the one in Sydney got the lowest number of attacks. As we can see, the threat from ransomware remains high, the penalty for breach is severe and growing. And on that sober note, back to you in the studio.
Thanks so much for that report, Chet, and your insights into the cyber threats that are lurking out there. And on a personal note, the hockey punk you set has proved an invaluable paperweight on my desk.
You're welcome.
Thanks again, Chet, for that report. And now, the segment many of you have been writing in about.
You know what burst my capacitors? Excluding C drive from scanning. Why would you do it? You need to know what's on your disk. Authorizing coin miners? Do some research before you actually decide to authorize malware to run inside your network, and disabling CryptoGuard on your servers because it interferes with backups. Maybe put in a little bit of work to figure out why CryptoGuard's triggering.
A fascinating glimpse into your mind, Benny. What do you do for relaxation, if you don't mind me asking?
I do what bursts my capacitors. I always feel good after one of those. Give it a try sometime.
Well, and speaking of time, it's time for our deep dive.
So what can we do to guard against ransomware threats? One key strategy is to go for defense in depth. In the Robin Hood attack, there are many upfront steps, including loading kernel drivers that crooks have previously created. They need to succeed at each step to get where they want, whereas you can stop them by blocking just one of the precursors.
Agreed. Also, control your entry points. In many network-wide ransomware attacks, the crooks sneak in by using remote access portals, notably Windows Remote Desktop Protocol. You opened up RDP for legitimate purposes, but then forgot to secure it properly.
You should also prefer two-factor authentication. A lot of ransomware incursions are made possible by weak or easily guessed passwords, or passwords that were exposed in a previous data breach. Two-factor authentication means that anyone logging in needs a one-time code that is different every time, which strengthens your protection against password cracking attacks.
And this is a good reminder to revisit your backup strategy. It's tempting to rely on live backups that happen in real time, such as mirroring files into network shares or copying changed files onto directly accessible cloud storage. But today's ransomware crooks go out of their way to find any online mirrors or backups you have made. They either delete these backups first or scramble them with the ransomware along with everything else. Keep offline, off-site backups too. The crooks won't be able to get at those.
Another thing is to watch your logs. Getting into a network, promoting yourself to administrator, probing for the security tools that are already in place always leaves behind some trace. In many attacks, the crooks were obvious in hindsight due to a combination of firewall alerts, account modification warnings, antivirus detections, and more. If you aren't going to look at your logs, you may as well not bother keeping them in the first place.
I'd add to that, patch early and patch often. If the crooks brought their own bug, they need to have sysadmin powers anyway. Don't make it easy for them by leaving security holes open that cybercriminals will exploit.
Well, looks like our time is up. We hope you found this special Break a Hacker's Heart edition about bring your own bugs useful to your enterprise. Ransomware is getting more sophisticated every year, and the only way to stay on top of it is to be vigilant. In this episode, we've discussed some of the key threats and what you can do about them.
I'd just add to that, people are the weakest link in cybersecurity. Invest in training your staff to be alert to the latest clever tricks cybercriminals use to exploit human behaviour. A well-trained staff member is much better placed to resist cyber threats.
So, that's all from me tonight in the Sophos Break a Hacker's Heart newsroom.
And that's it from me, thanks to Ben, Chet and Duck. For more information or to follow up on our stories, head on over to sophos.com. We'll see you next time in the Sophos newsroom. Good night, everybody.
So what's going to happen to the graphics guy?
Nothing, mate. I was told he's the son of the MD on Work Experience.